Hey guys, welcome back. So now let's see the two-dimensional arrays. What does it mean to use a 2D array, and which are the differences from the one-dimensional arrays? So first of all, let's go on with the 1D arrays so that we can go on and spot the differences. An array, as we said in the previous lesson, is actually an indexed set of related elements. So when we want to store several pieces of data of the same time, instead of using many variables, we can use an array. So you can think of an array as a list of data items, a list of elements, each with a number or index, so that it can enable you to refer to each item. An array keeps track of multiple pieces of information in linear order in one-dimensional list. So arrays that we have considered until now are one-dimensional arrays, a single line of elements. Now let's assume that we have 5 students. We can either use 5 different variables where we will store the first names of the students, or we can use an array, an one-dimensional array. So we can either use the variable student1 to assign the value John to this variable, or we can assign the value Nick to the second variable, the value Chris to the third variable, value Helen to the fourth variable, value Maria to the fifth variable. Or we can use an one-dimensional array. Name it students, that it can store 5 values. So here is actually what we call the index of each value. We have index 1, index 2, index 3. Actually is the position inside the array, so that we can say that in the first position the value John is assigned, in the second position is its value Nick, in the third position value Chris, in the fourth position value Helen, and in the fifth position value Maria. So actually let's assume we have 2 classes. We don't have just one class, as we saw there. We don't have just one class with 5 students or 10 or 50 students, but we have 2 classes where we would like to store again the name of the students of the 2 classes. But now I would like to know if the student is in the first class or is in the second class. So I can either use 2 one-dimensional arrays or use one 2-dimensional array. So for example, I can say that I have 2-dimensional arrays right there. The first one is student class 1, the second one is student class 2, and in the first position I have value John, in the second value Nick, in the third value Chris, in the fourth, but these positions refer to the first class, while in the second class, in the second array, I have again position 1 that I have value Mario, position 2 that I have value Nandia, position 3 that I have value John, and again, as you can see, I have 5 students right there. On the other hand, I can use one 2-dimensional arrays. one two-dimensional array. So that means that the first index refers to class and the second index refers to students. So that I say that in the first class, the first student is named John. As you can see, the first class, the first student is named John. Again, the second student, but in the first class, is named Nick. And the first in the first class, the third student is named Chris. The fourth student in the first class is named Ellen. The fifth student in the first class is named Maria. And then I say in the second class, the first student is named Mario. In the second class, the second student is called Nandia, and as you can see, there is actually there is the same value, but instead of using two one-dimensional arrays, I use one two-dimensional array. So let's go on, and let's assume we have two classes in two different schools. So I can use for 1D arrays, so that I can say that in school 1, in first class, I have 5 students, 5 different names, as you can see. I have again, as you can see, John, Nick, Chris, Helen, Maria. 5 students that are in the first class, in the first school. I have in the first school a second class that the first student is named Mario, the second Nandia, the third John, the fourth Jason, the fifth Michael. But in the second school, as you can see, I have 2 different classes with 5 students in each one, that each student has a different name, of course. So I can either use for one-dimensional arrays, or I can use two-dimensional arrays. For example, I can have two, as we saw in the previous slide. I can have school 1 students, so that there are all the students from school 1, and school 2 students, that I can have all the students from school 2 in exactly the same way. I can say the first two-dimensional array school 1 students, and then say that the first index refers to class, the second index refers to student. So I can have two-dimensional arrays, or I can have one three-dimensional array, so that the first index refers to school, the second index refers to class, and the third index refers to students. So that I am telling you there that the first student, the first student from the first class, from the first school, is called John, or the second student from the first class, from the first school, is called Nick. The fifth student from the first class, for the first school right there, is called Maria. The first class, the first student, I'm sorry, in the second class, in the first school, is called Mario. The second student from the second class, from the first school, is called Nandia. The fifth student from the second class, from the first school is called Michael. And then I go to the second school, and I say again that in the second school, the first class, the first student is actually called Mike. In the second school, in the first class, in the second student is called Dino, and we can go on until the final student, that is the fifth student in actually the second class in the second school is called Jim. And here you can see the indexes are 2 to 5 in the second school, so we have 2 in the second class, so we have 2 the fifth student. This is very important because this is actually the size of this 3D array. Always the last value of the last position of each array refers to the size, or you can also say it in other languages as the length or the size of each array. So in this 3D array, the size of this array is actually, I will write it right there, is I'm sorry for this, 2 I'm sorry, I didn't read very well. I will write it again. It's 2 multiple 5. So that this tells us that I have 20 values stored. I'm sorry, I don't know why my pen is not writing very well. I will configure it. Okay, I have 20 values because the size of this array is 2 multiple 2 multiple 5. This means 4 multiple 5, which means 20. But also in these 4 1D arrays, the size for each array is 5. This has the size is 5, the size is 5, the size is 5, because the last index of the last value, the last position of this array is just 5. I will go in the previous slide and I will tell you that in this 2D array, if we assume that we have 2 classes and only 1 school, is 2 multiple 5, which means 10. But the size is 2 multiple 5. This is how we symbolize this array. So I think that with this example you understood the 2-dimensional and the 3-dimensional arrays, so that you can easily respond to my question that how which is the right dimensional array that I can use if I'm going to have 10 students from 4 different classes, from 3 different schools, from 2 different cities, from 5 different countries. I would like to answer me this question: how many students will I need? So which is the size of the array that you are going to use, and how many dimensions should this array have if I'm going to have these students from these classes, from these schools, from these cities, from these countries. Think about it and answer in the next assignment. Thank you very much and looking forward to seeing you in the next lesson.